At 6:45 each morning, Ezekiel Boone arrived at the corner of 4th and Deacon Street intersection, now surrounded by coffee chains, yoga studios, and glassy new condos. Long ago, it had been the heart of the Black District. Now, only the crooked iron bus sign and an overgrown path of sidewalk hinted at what once stood there. Ezekiel came not because he needed to, but because routine had always kept his bones from rusting. He was 78, but there was no slouch in his shoulders. He wore pressed slacks, a buttoned shirt, and a tan overcoat even when the spring air turned warm. His shoes, though scuffed, were polished with care. In one hand, he always carried an old leather briefcase scratched, weathered, and heavy only with memory. Most mornings, people passed him without a word. A few spared him brief glances. Most, though, looked through him like glass. When a young white woman approached the stop with her coffee, she paused and tightened her grip on her purse. Without a word, she crossed the street and waited on the other side. Ezekiel noticed. He always noticed. But his face betrayed nothing. His eyes scanned the horizon for the 107 bus that rarely arrived on time. It didn't matter. He wasn't waiting for the bus. He was waiting for the day to begin. Years ago, that bus took him to work. Before the school district restructured the staff, he had taught shop class for 31 years. Before that, he had been a combat engineer, rebuilding airstrips and bridges in Southeast Asia. Before even that, he had built barns with his father in Alabama, back when a black man had to step off the sidewalk if a white man came walking. A boy named Liam passed by that morning 14, hoodie half-sipped, earbuds in. He glanced up at Ezekiel, noticed the briefcase, noticed the stillness. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Liam looked away. That moment stuck with the boy longer than it should have. 2 cars passed. One honked, and someone shouted something garbled from the window. Ezekiel didn't flinch. Sometimes they yelled slurs, sometimes just laughter. Either way, he stood quietly at the bus stop like he had every morning for years. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pride, it was patience, it was routine, and it was survival. He opened his briefcase with calm hands and pulled out a small paperback dog-eared, annotated in red ink, its cover nearly gone. A raisin in the sun. He had taught it nearly every semester until the school switched to digital modules. He read it the way someone rereads the names on a tombstone, carefully, respectfully, and knowing what others had forgotten. Behind him, the sun rose slowly. The shadows of modern buildings stretched across old cracks in the pavement, and Ezekiel Boone waited, same as he did yesterday, same as he would tomorrow. Because the world only looks up when something falls. And Ezekiel had learned long ago he wouldn't give them the satisfaction. It started with a voice sharp, cocky, and just loud enough to be heard over the purr of a modified engine. "Yo, look at MLK Jr. over there. Man still waiting on the dream, huh?" The car slowed as it rolled past the bus stop. Inside, 4 teenagers burst into laughter. Jace Tuller leaned out the window, phone in hand, angling his camera toward Ezekiel Boone, who stood quietly with his briefcase resting by his feet. "Smile, old-timer," Jace sneered. "You're going viral today." Ezekiel didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He kept reading the tattered book in his hand, his eyes steady. The page he was on was underlined in pencil, worn from being turned too many times. But the moment froze in Jace's phone like bait on a hook. Beside him, Shaylin Foster tapped quickly on her own screen. Her nails were long and painted, and her laughter was shrill and hollow. She captioned the video, "Civil rights grandpa still out here waiting for Rosa Parks. Throwback, boomer bus." They drove off, laughter fading behind them, windows down, music up. By that afternoon, the video had over 3.0 views. By evening, 12.0. Students at the local high school shared it in group chats and snapped screenshots. Some laughed. Others just watched and scrolled on. Ezekiel, still frame-balding, black, old, and unmoved, became a meme without context. In a crowded hallway, a junior named Devante passed a group laughing at the clip. When he caught a glimpse of the video, his smile dropped. "That's Mr. Boone," he muttered, but no one listened. By Thursday, the video had been edited. A soundtrack added. Some random user dubbed a speech from Coming to America over it. A teacher saw the clip and said nothing. The principal shrugged it off. Not our business if it's off campus. But Ezekiel knew something had changed. He felt it the next morning, when people stared longer. A car drove by and honked twice, one boy hanging out the passenger window, grinning wide as he waved mockingly. No one said the word, but Ezekiel heard it in the tone. That tired word dressed up as a joke that had outlived its shame. Still, he came back to the same spot. Still read the same book. That afternoon, the mail carrier, a young black woman named Keisha, approached him gently. "Mr. Boone, you all right? They talk in mess on the internet. You don't deserve that." Ezekiel smiled faintly. "Miss, if I let every whisper chase me home, I'd have never left Alabama." Keisha stood quietly for a beat, then nodded. "Just know someone's watching who ain't laughing." As she walked off, Ezekiel sat back down on the bench and returned to his page. The noise hadn't stopped, but he'd lived through worse than noise. He turned the page slowly, his hand firm. He had survived burning crosses, cracked ribs, lost jobs, and locked doors. A video? A few kids laughing? That wasn't new. The only new thing was the way the world now filmed its cruelty and then scrolled past it like entertainment. Ezekiel Boone's apartment was small, one bedroom, no television, and a window that overlooked a parking lot filled with cracked pavement and aging sedans. Inside, everything had its place. A wooden table held a single photograph in a worn frame. Ezekiel standing beside a tall, brick school building, arm around a student in a graduation robe. The year was 1985. Both men smiled wide, their eyes full of promise. He placed his briefcase gently on the kitchen counter and opened it not to take something out, but to look. The contents never changed. Yellowed lesson plans, hand-sketched carpentry diagrams, decades-old student evaluations, and a laminated ID from Carver Vocational High School. He hadn't taught in years, not since the district shut down the program during budget cuts. They didn't tell him to his face. The principal, new, young, and brisk, left a typed notice in his mailbox. "Your services are no longer required." He had served that school through riots, through integration, through years where tools were stolen and windows were broken. Still, he showed up. Still, he taught. He folded the paper edges again, kept them neat. That was the thing about dignity, it didn't depend on someone else's recognition. In the living room, the silence was complete. No TV to shout over, no radio hum, just the creak of old floorboards and the faint ticking of the wall clock. From a drawer, he retrieved a shoebox filled with letters, thank you notes from students, a few newspaper clippings, a photo of a carved birdhouse, given by a boy who used to stutter. One note, written in pencil and barely legible, read, "Mr. Boone, you're the first person who ever said I was good at anything that mattered." Ezekiel held the paper for a long time, his fingers gentle. He wasn't famous. His name wasn't in any history books, but he had built boys into men, taught young women how to shape things with their hands, and believe in the value of doing something right. When some teachers panicked at the first sign of trouble, he stayed calm. When administrators wanted quiet compliance, he asked questions they didn't like. And though time moved forward and recognition faded, he had never stopped showing up at the bus stop, at the library, in his Sunday blazer, because to vanish silently would be to let them win. That Friday evening, as the sun set behind the row of red brick buildings, he sat at his small table and spooned warm lentils from a pot. He thought about the video. He hadn't seen it, but he knew what was in it. He knew that laughter. It was the same that followed him decades ago when he tried to eat at the front counter. The same that rose when he walked into union halls. Laughter that wasn't humor, it was warning. But he was still here, still standing, still waiting, not for a bus, not for justice, just waiting to see if the world would ever remember the hands that built it. The Saturday sun rose high and hot, baking the sidewalk as Ezekiel Boone took his usual seat at the bus stop. His overcoat hung on the hook at home. He wore a pressed white shirt today, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His briefcase, same as always, sat upright beside him like a faithful companion. Cars passed. A cyclist nodded. A few pedestrians glanced his way, then kept walking. He returned to his book without concern. At 10:12 a.m., the black Mustang pulled up fast, music thumping, bass vibrating the curb. "Look who's still clocking in for the invisible shift," Jace Tuller sneered, leaning halfway out the window. Shalem was in the back seat, already filming. Her phone angled to catch Ezekiel's profile. Trevor and Cody laughed from the front, egging each other on. Jace stepped out of the car this time. He wore his varsity jacket even though it was 82 degrees, the letters stitched across his chest like armor he didn't earn. "Hey there, Professor. Got a minute?" Ezekiel closed his book slowly, looking up. "Morning." Jace circled him like a predator. "What you reading? Old slave hymns? Or maybe some Frederick Douglass bedtime stories?" Cody laughed loud and long. Shaylin panned her phone deliberately, capturing every second. "Get the bag and the shot," she whispered. "That old man briefcase is gold." "Just passing time," Ezekiel said, his voice calm. "Same as you." "You think you're better than us?" Jace said, stepping closer. "With your old man suit and that bus stop wisdom?" Ezekiel looked him in the eye, nothing hard, nothing defensive. Just the same clarity that once stood calmly in front of angry mobs in the 60s. "I don't think anything about you, son. Not yet." That stung more than an insult. Jace's grin vanished. He slapped the book from Ezekiel's hand, letting it fall spine first onto the sidewalk. Still, Ezekiel didn't rise. He bent slowly to retrieve it. "You ain't in a classroom anymore, Grandpa," Jace muttered. Then, with no wind-up, just boredom and cruelty, shoved him. The old man stumbled. His right foot caught the edge of the curb. His knees buckled and he fell sideways, shoulder striking concrete, palms scraping against the grit. The briefcase toppled and burst open. Papers scattering like birds startled into flight. Ezekiel lay still. Not unconscious, just stunned. Just absorbing the weight of what had happened. The laughter from the car was sudden and cruel. "Bro, you broke him!" Cody shouted. Behind them, a car slowed. Deputy Alan Ricks sat in the driver's seat. He saw at the shove, the boy laughing, the man on the ground. He hesitated. His hand hovered over the radio. Then Jace turned toward the Mustang, yelling, "Let's bounce!" And the car peeled out, tires squealing. Ricks followed the exhaust with his eyes but didn't move. Ezekiel sat up slowly, ignoring the sting in his shoulder. He gathered the papers with shaking hands. Not a word, not a curse, not a plea. He just picked up his things while the world kept walking by. The bruising set in by nightfall. A dull, blooming pain along Ezekiel Boone's shoulder blade made every movement stiff, every breath cautious. But he didn't go to the clinic. He never did. He placed a damp towel across his back and sat at his small table with his briefcase in front of him, the latch now bent from the fall. He studied it in silence. The leather, worn thin along the corners, had split open slightly. It had taken the worst of the sidewalk. The contents had spilled scattered on public concrete like discarded memories. Ezekiel began to reorder the pieces slowly, laying them out as if reconstructing a life no one had asked about. There were lesson plans from 1982, handwritten in fine ink, diagrams of dovetail joints he used to teach his freshmen. A faded newspaper article with the headline, "Teacher Saves Student in Classroom Fire." Ezekiel had pulled the boy from the smoke with his bare hands. No medal. Just a brief nod from the superintendent, who later voted to close the vocational wing. Beneath those pages was the letter, the one he always kept closest. It was dated 2001, written in crooked penmanship. "Mr. Boone, I was in prison at 19. You told me I was worth more than bars. I believed you eventually. I'm 33 now. A foreman. My daughter just got her braces tightened. I owe you more than a thank you, but it's all I have. Darius J." Ezekiel read it slowly, as if hearing Darius's voice. He folded the letter, set it aside, then retrieved a photo from the briefcase pocket. 8 boys standing in front of a half-finished picnic bench, black, white, Latino, smiling, covered in sawdust. Every one of them had built something with their hands. That photo never went on a school wall. No one had asked for it. The knock came just after 9. Deputy Alan Ricks stood in the hallway, hat in hand, eyes low. "I saw what happened," he said. Ezekiel opened the door wider but didn't speak. "I should have stopped. I hesitated," Ricks admitted. "Didn't want to escalate." Ezekiel raised one brow. "Didn't want to escalate a black man being shoved to the ground by 4 white boys?" The deputy swallowed. "I filed an incident report," Ricks said quietly. "They'll call it mischief unless you press charges." Ezekiel looked down at his bent briefcase, then back at the deputy. "You ever see a house frame collapse?" he asked. Usually it's not one big hit. It's little rots, nails missing, beams ignored. Rix didn't reply. Ezekiel didn't press charges. Not because he forgave. Because he understood the difference between punishment and change. Rix walked away feeling smaller than when he'd arrived. Not scolded, but educated in a language that didn't shout, didn't curse, just pointed. Back inside, Ezekiel placed the papers back into the case and pushed the latch closed. It clicked, slightly warped, but still holding. Like him, still holding. Sunday passed with silence. No visitors, no apologies, no calls from school administrators or parents, just the buzz of a distant lawnmower and the wind knocking softly against Ezekiel Boone's window pane. He sat at his kitchen table with his arm in a homemade sling, a clean dish towel knotted around his shoulder. The bruising had deepened, now stretching dark and wide across his back. Still, he moved with care, unfolding each page in his briefcase, laying them out like a puzzle no one had asked to see. The day drifted by until the quiet was interrupted by another knock. Slower this time. Less official. Deputy Alan Rix stood there again, hat pressed tightly in his hands, his badge catching the porch light. "I've been thinking about what you said," Rix began. "About the beams, about rot." Ezekiel leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. "I didn't stop them because I didn't want to make a scene," Rix confessed. "Didn't want to be the white cop who caused trouble over some kids being dumb." "You didn't want to be the reason people felt uncomfortable," Ezekiel said plainly. Rix nodded. "But you weren't worried about my discomfort," Ezekiel added. "Or the blood on my palm." The words were calm. That made them heavier. Rix shifted. "You deserved more than that silence." "I've lived through 1,000 versions of that silence," Ezekiel replied. "Sat through it in courtrooms, felt it in churches, heard it in school board meetings when folks said urban needs like it was a curse." He gestured toward the briefcase, still open on the table. "Those kids didn't invent hate," he said. "They inherited it." Rick stepped inside. For the first time, he looked closely at the paper set, the faces of children in photos, at yellowed lesson plans filled with care. "Why keep all this?" he asked softly. "Because I built people," Ezekiel answered. "And when you build something, you don't just throw away the blueprint when it's out of style." Rix took a breath, then reached into his jacket pocket. "I made some calls last night, tracked down some of your former students. One's a state rep now. Another runs a tech company out west. They all remember you, Mr. Boone." Ezekiel's brow rose slightly. "I've arranged a town meeting," Rix continued. "Not a press stunt, not punishment. I want people to hear the truth from them, from you. This town needs to look itself in the mirror." Ezekiel stepped forward, voice low. "They won't like what they see." "Good," Rix replied. "That's the beginning of change." Ezekiel looked away for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. "You be careful with this," he said. "Truth's like a chisel. You can build with it or split your own hand." Rix nodded and left. Ezekiel closed the door slowly, then returned to the table. For the first time in weeks, he didn't open the briefcase. He simply sat back in his chair and waited, not for the bus this time, but for the truth to arrive and the silence to finally break. The auditorium of Fremont High School hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Word had spread fast through church bulletins, barbershops, teachers' group texts, and even the community Facebook page. "Town Reflection Gathering," the flyer had read, but everyone knew who it was really about. Ezekiel Boone sat quietly in the front row, wearing his best navy blazer, the sling still wrapped around his shoulder. His briefcase rested at his feet, closed but present, a symbol now. Behind him, rows of students, parents, teachers, and city officials murmured. The air felt unusually still, as if the walls themselves were waiting. Deputy Alan Rix stepped to the microphone. "Today isn't about punishment. It's about recognition," he began, voice firm. "Recognition of someone we failed to see and the harm that failure caused." From the side of the stage, a woman stood and walked to the mic. Regina Holloway, now 43, in a tailored dress and heels. "I was a 16-year-old who believed I was stupid," she said. "Couldn't read past a 6th grade level. Mr. Boone stayed after class every day for 2 months until I could. I'm a speech therapist now, because he didn't give up on me when everyone else did." Applause broke out, not polite, but real. A few students stopped whispering and leaned forward. Next came Leon Tisdale, a tall black man in a firefighter's uniform. He spoke plainly. When my older brother died, I was angry. I broke lockers. Mr. Boone pulled me into the shop room, gave me a plank, and said, "Build something instead of breaking." I built a bench, then a bookshelf, then a life. Gasps rippled when Councilwoman Michelle Perez approached the podium. I wouldn't be standing here if Mr. Boone hadn't let me work in his class after school when I had nowhere else to go. He taught me to use a lathe, but more than lathe taught me to walk into rooms where no one expects you and act like you belong. Each voice carved away at the tension, exposing a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. Ezekiel Boone wasn't just a man at a bus stop. He was the foundation under the town's feet. Finally, Rix turned to the audience. And yet, when that man was mocked, shoved, and humiliated in broad daylight, most of us stayed silent. In the crowd, Jace Tuller sat rigid, his face drained of color. His father beside him looked straight ahead, eyes burning holes into the floor. "You teach hate with jokes," Rick said. "You teach cruelty by silence." He gestured toward Ezekiel. "And you teach integrity by example." Slowly, the room stood. First a few, then dozens. A standing ovation not for fame or medals, but for presence, for grace under fire. Ezekiel didn't rise. He simply looked around the room, nodded once, and whispered, "Now they see." Not because he shouted, because he endured. Because truth, when spoken plainly, echoes louder than any insult ever could. The morning after the town meeting, the sun rose gently over 4th and Deacon. The sky was a washed-out blue, the kind of light that softened hard edges and made old buildings look like history instead of decay. Ezekiel Boone was already there. He arrived early, as always, dressed in a slate-gray blazer with deep brown buttons, the same one he'd worn to church for the last 20 years. His shoulder still ached from the fall, but the sling was gone. He walked slow, steady, his shoes shined. The bench at the bus stop had changed. Where the cracked iron seat once sat, there was now a polished oak bench, smooth to the touch, sturdy in its frame. At its center was a brass plaque, gleaming in the morning light. It read, "Ezekiel Boone, teacher, veteran, builder. Dignity doesn't age." Ezekiel lowered himself onto the bench slowly, every movement deliberate. His briefcase taped at the corners, scarred from the fall, rested beside him like an old friend. Across the street, a small group began to gather. Some wore Fremont High jackets. Some carried nothing but their nervous energy. Jace Tuller stood at the front, hands jammed in his pockets, his varsity jacket zipped up despite the warm air. Behind him, Trevor, Cody, and even Shaylin lingered, hesitant. Deputy Alan Ricks stood nearby, arms crossed not with authority, but presence. Jace crossed the street first. Ezekiel looked up as the boy approached, his face still bruised by shame more than consequence. "Mr. Boone," Jace began, voice low, "I came to say I was wrong." The words trembled, but they were real. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what you'd done. And the worst part is, I didn't care." Ezekiel studied him, the way he used to study students who thought they could lie past a mistake. But there was no defense here, only discomfort. "You thought ignorance was harmless," Ezekiel said, quiet but firm. "But ignorance with power? That's just permission to harm." Jace nodded, swallowing hard. "My grandfather served in Korea. When I told him what I did, he looked at me like I was a stranger, said if he were alive to see someone shove him like that." His voice caught. The pause said more than any apology could. Trevor and Cody stepped forward next. "We didn't get it," Cody muttered. "We thought it was just a joke." Ezekiel didn't soften. "You thought I was something to laugh at. Something old, something black, something safe." Trevor looked down. "We want to make it right." The sound of a flatbed truck pulling up behind them turned heads. Workers in city vests stepped out carefully. One held a small sign wrapped in cloth. They unwrapped it slowly and installed it into the ground beside the bench. "Reserved for wisdom." It had been Shaylin's idea. She hadn't filmed anything since the incident. Her phone, for once, remained tucked away. The moment settled, not into silence, but into stillness. Then a voice broke through. It was Principal Evelyn Graves. She stepped forward from the crowd, clearing her throat. "Mr. Boone," she said, "on behalf of Fremont High, I'd like to invite you back. Not to teach a class, but to guide students. As a mentor. For those who feel invisible, for those we forget to see." Ezekiel raised one brow. "So I'll be a reminder?" "No, sir," she replied. "You'll be a blueprint." A soft murmur of approval spread through the crowd. Ezekiel didn't respond immediately. He turned instead to the bench, ran his fingers over the smooth brass letters. Then, slowly, he nodded. "That's fine," he said. "But don't forget, the bench is for everyone. Wisdom don't care about skin color or age. It only asks that someone listens." People clapped. Not wildly, not like a performance just long enough to feel it. Before the crowd dispersed, a boy stepped forward quietly. Liam, the same boy who once walked past Ezekiel every morning without speaking. He carried a book under his arm. "Sir," Liam asked, "can I sit with you for a while?" Ezekiel smiled. "Of course," he said. "That's how we build things, side by side." And so they sat. Old and young, black and white, builder and learner. Not because of a headline, not because of shame, but because someone finally looked, and someone else was brave enough to stay.